Let's get started. Okay, guys, I can see that a bunch of you are here. Hope you're all okay. Everybody okay?
Yes, miss, and you?
I am good. Little tired today, little tired, and then I just had this power cut and we're still sort of unstable. So let me just try and not be ruffled, you know? Okay.
Wait, this is
I was hoping, you know, that more persons would have been here by now, but anyway, it's dead on 6 o'clock. They probably will kill me for starting, but because of the power, I want to start. I wanted to spend some time with you talking about how you conduct an appraisal, because it's such an important part of your job, regardless of whether you're a manager or supervisor or you're in HR. As long as you're managing people or leading people, knowing how to conduct an appraisal is so important. So I've even put this together so that I could elaborate even a little more than what is in the book, okay? And I want to encourage you also to read a bit more about how you conduct an appraisal, because so many things happen and so many things go wrong when the appraisals are being done if you do not understand how to conduct an appraisal. And if you don't know where to take your cues from and you know how to react to certain things, everything goes upside down. So I wanted to spend a little time and talk with you about this. Now, one of the things to remember is I told you about rate of errors, and this is where your rate of errors are committed in full. You start committing them when you are actually preparing the appraisal, because you start manipulating what you don't know. In other words, you start putting in false things because you didn't do your work as a supervisor or manager. So you start, you know, trying to assess something that you really don't know anything about. You never observe the employee's performance. Your goal setting was very weak, very poor. All of a sudden you're sitting down now and you're saying, how am I going to measure this person's performance? What I wrote here, doesn't really measure the performance. So what am I going to do? You know, I put some things here that I'm not sure how I can measure them. But as I mentioned some time back, I noticed that in the public sector, and I'm trying to get some of my private sector clients to adopt this activity. I've noticed in some of the agencies that on the work plan, they have actually asked that you put down how you are going to assess the employee's performance. What is going to be evidence? Separate and apart from the standard you have written. I mean, as an example, you may have written a standard. Somebody has a project to do, and you have written the objective for the project. And then when you get to the standard, you have written that you are going to, the standard is 50% of the project completed within schedule, 20% completed in the second schedule, and maybe the final amount completed in the third schedule. Now, first of all, nobody knows what the schedule is, okay? And hopefully you have set a schedule. You can't begin to measure something that cannot be observed. So a lot of people like to say, according to established guidelines or according to established timelines. And when you go searching for this document now, that should have had a schedule or a timeline or a project plan on it, you can't find such a document. It's nowhere to be found. Okay, so you have to be careful. It's the same way where you said somebody is to improve something 20% over last year or 10% over the last quarter. And when you go looking for what was the expectation for last year, you can't find it. So do not write your standards looking for historical information if you know that evidence is not there. But in addition to writing the standard, using the project as the example again, in addition to writing the standard, I have noticed that in the public sector, in some of the agencies, and I don't know whether it is a given for the whole public sector, I'm believing to think that's not so, because I'm only seeing it in a couple of agencies that I've worked in, of those that I've worked in. they have another column asking for the evidence. So in addition to the standard saying 20% is to be completed in the first quarter, the evidence they would also want us to look at is they would ask for things like percentage of accuracy, percentage of work not rejected, percentage of work approved, and things like that. So you can't get away when they do that. You can't get away with just coming up with a bunch of assumptions as to what somebody said or somebody did or what you thought should have been done. So I really like that column now in the work plans, and I have been trying to adapt it and implement it in some of the clients where I work to ensure that people are really doing what they're supposed to do when it comes to supervision, and that the appraisals now have a better chance of being fair and not subjective. So the first problem we have in conducting an appraisal is not having factual information. And that goes back to the dealing with the rate of errors. And those rate of errors will be committed if you cannot have factual information. You have no evidence, and the employee is going to challenge you. So as we get ready to do an interview, you need to sit down and first of all, think about what is the purpose of the interview. Now, when we say the purpose of the interview, remember you have different types of appraisals, going back again into our work, according to what the organization elected to do. So it might have been a probationary appraisal, okay? It might have been a mid-year appraisal, it might have been the annual appraisal, or it might have been a special appraisal based on a developmental goal that you have set for somebody who was performing very poorly at the last appraisal period. So the first thing you do when you sit down is you're going to communicate with this person in front of you. And it's very, very important that your communication skills be good communication skills. As I said last week, I miss the face-to-face so that this portion of it would have really come out in the role plays. So I want you to still try and visualize, especially if you have had an appraisal. How many of you here have had to sit down and be appraised by your manager? Let me hear some folks answer.
I have.
Okay. How did the process go for you? What did you think of the process?
Well, on one occasion, I had to do a self appraisal, and then afterwards it was given to my supervisor. We then arranged a meeting. We discussed the grades I gave myself and why it is that I gave myself those grades. After which she would then indicate if she was in agreement with the grades I gave myself, or if it is that she had a different grade than what I gave myself. But usually, say for example, if I gave myself a A and she would have said I deserved a B plus, she would basically have the final say where that is concerned.
Okay.
Yes. But that
Okay.
was the process used
So
to.
did you come out of there feeling satisfied? How did you feel at the end of that appraisal?
Well, I was satisfied. I was indeed satisfied based on feedback given, and I was basically new at that desk. I didn't get low grades, but for some areas, I would have probably felt that I would have been a little bit more advanced. But she said that I needed to grow somewhat in that
Okay.
area. So
So you
I was
felt
indeed satisfied.
satisfied with the process and you understood and you felt it was fair?
Yes, I did.
Okay, good,
Yes.
good. So it's very important that the interview goes well, that people feel they've been treated fairly, and your communication skills are important. So this is like a little guide for you. So the first thing you're going to do when somebody comes in, we like to break the ice. So we said hi, just like how, you know, you'd say hi to me this evening and I say hi to you, how are you? And, you know, it's COVID time now, so you probably would say, I hope everybody at home is safe. Are you all safe? Everybody okay? You're practicing and you allow the person to get comfortable. It doesn't matter whether it is going to be a poor result in terms of performance or an excellent result, whatever. You have to remember that if you make somebody very uncomfortable, the appraisal is not going to go well from beginning to end. And you are not going to get the kind of feedback you want from the person you are appraising either. Somebody is just going to clam up, and as the interview goes on, they're going to become more and more defensive. And we'll be talking about defensiveness a little later on. So you sit down and you explain, why are we here today? So we're here to discuss your mid-year appraisal. You know that that is the norm. You know, you probably had one last year if the person had been here for a long time, or if it's a new person, you explain this is your first mid-year review. So, you know, I hope that you will learn a lot from it, and you know that you'll understand, you know, what your job is like and what the organization is about, etc., etc. So you phrase that depending on who you have in front of you. Now you might know you have a defensive person there, but you're going to pretend like you didn't even know that. You're going to conduct this properly, like a professional person, and hopefully in doing that you're going to get the most out of it as well, in terms of the employee coming to an agreement with you, because the aim of all of this is at the end of the day to get the employee to agree to go forward or to further develop or to agree with your scores or whatever, because there's nothing to be gained if you have a disagreement at the end. So your aim from the beginning is for a win-win situation. Okay, so you map out how much time. Hopefully you had set up the timing and you have left no less than an hour to carry out your appraisal, depending on the level of the job and the amount of projects somebody had and the nature of the projects. You might want to leave 2 hours, okay? Because it's something that you should plan for. You can't come in this morning and tell somebody you have an interview this afternoon. You have a appraisal is to be done this afternoon. No, not at all. You should give somebody at least 2 weeks notice. And remember the role of the self-appraisal. Does anybody remember how the self-appraisal is to be done? What is to happen with the self-appraisal? Does anybody remember? Nobody remembers our discussion about the self-appraisal? My.
Yes, but I don't really understand the question. I don't understand what you're asking. How it is to be done, meaning how often it should be done?
Well, what is the role of the self-appraisal, in terms of the overall appraisal? Yes, how is it to be done? You were told earlier on in the course what's to happen with the self-appraisal and some recommendations. So where does the
I do
self-appraisal?
particularly remember, it clearly stated that the self-appraisal is not a one-time thing for the year. There should be several, and you should be able to review changes and feedback that would have been given to the employee. You should have another follow-up appraisal to see if those changes were implemented. I'm not sure if I answered you.
No. Hold on. Anna, who is this? Anna?
Yes, miss.
No, Anna. No, Anna. No, Anna. You've gotten some stuff there jumbled up a little bit. Let me clear it up for you
Yes.
all.
Yes, please.
Because there's a little bit of roller coaster stuff there. The self-appraisal, okay, is part of the overall appraisal process. And it should be given to the employee at least 2 weeks. We recommend at least 2 weeks, but companies sometimes choose longer periods. Some people forget about it and they choose shorter periods. But the general recommendation is that you use about 2 weeks ask for it to be submitted to you about 2 weeks before the appraisal itself, because you want to be able to review it and to see where your disagreements are or agreements in terms of what the employee's perception is of what the person, what he or she thinks she achieved during that period. Now, what I think you're confusing it a little bit with is the feedback meetings. Feedback is a continuous process. and feedback should be given to the employee throughout the year. The purpose of the feedback meetings is to allow that person, if needs be, to take corrective action. Now, we don't have a set time for feedback. Each department or each manager should, or each organization is going to set up what they think is a good feedback process. So they might say to you, I want you to meet at least once a month with your staff individually to give them feedback. Or a manager might look at the staff member and decide that this person needs more coaching, this person needs more help. So I'm going to set up these feedback sessions a little more often, at least for a period of time, to give this person feedback to allow them to improve before the next appraisal. Or in a case, if it's after the appraisal and the appraisal scores, the performance scores were low, you may put that person on a developmental plan that requires them, yes, to have weekly feedback sessions with you, etc. But do not confuse the feedback sessions with the self-appraisal. Okay, the self-appraisal is the employee's own appraisal that they are going to do of how they performed prior to the formal appraisal being carried out. So in most cases, some companies will only have appraisal once per year, which is not the good process. The recommended process is at least twice per year. So there's mid-year and end of year. So the appraisal would be done mid-year and end of year. And the self-appraisal would be prepared by the employee for the discussion, say at least 2 weeks before, and forwarded to the manager or the supervisor at least 2 weeks before the appraisal is to take place.
Thank you, Ms. I would love to be privileged to conduct my self-appraisal. Listening to you, I'm not familiar with that process within my organization. The only thing closest to it that I can think about, sorry, let me turn. The only thing closest to it that I can think about is when the appraisal is done, there's like probably 15 minutes after receiving the scores that I'm allowed to sit, look it over, and probably have the discussion with them of whether or not I agree or want to contest anything that is evaluated.
So is there an ongoing discussion during the appraisal in terms of, okay, taking each item and explain to you what went wrong, or what was good, what wasn't so good?
No,
or could we improve this, or what else would you want to take on? No? Well, you see, that's not how the appraisal is supposed to be. A two-way communication activity. It's not for somebody to just sit down and read out to you how well you did on an activity or how well you didn't do, and then hand you the document and say, read it and tell me whether you agree with it. No, that's not how it is supposed to be done. But you will find these situations where there is a lack of training. If the organization has not invested in training persons how to carry out appraisals, then each person just selects his or her own style and goes about their business. Because as far as they're concerned, as long as we conduct this appraisal and complete these forms and turn them in, the process is done. So this is why it is so important, as we said very early in the course, that management commitment is very, very important. Commitment from the top. Policies have to be set in the organization as to what is to happen with performance management, and training has to be given. Now, I've seen a lot of the organizations doing training because I have been into a lot of them, both in private and public sector. I've been in to do performance management training, which includes training on, conducting an appraisal, improving those skills, etc. But it's unfortunate because you're going to find a lot of organizations where managers have not been privy to any training, and they figure that all they have to do is fill out this form, sit with you, you look at it, and maybe turn in your self-appraisal and say whether you agree or you don't agree. So it's, it's kind of sad, but we still have to keep trying and hoping that we can get, especially here locally, organizations to see the value of having proper performance review meetings. There's less conflict in the organization when the appraisals are properly done. Okay, well, hopefully I cleared up that little area for you. You still have any questions about the difference between the feedback meetings and the self-appraisal?
Not from me, miss. It's clear to me now.
Okay. Is there anybody else who is not clear on it that needs to ask a question? Okay. So basically, some things have to be in place before you can conduct the appraisal. Okay. So we are at the stage where we're going to get ready to conduct the appraisal, but we had to prepare for it. We had to prepare a time, a place. The place should be private. I think we have said that somewhere in the course, that the place should be private. If you're in a place where it's an open office situation, you can't just conduct an appraisal in the middle of an office. So if your company has a conference room or a meeting room, then you need to book that and use it, because it's a very confidential process and it's a very private time, extremely private time. It's nobody else's business except you and the employee. We even encourage employees not to go about and discuss their appraisal, but many of them do. And then the rest of the organization gets all upset because, again, when you look at communication skills, and you would have seen some of this when we spoke about implementing a communication plan for the organization, it's going to depend on what has been the perception of the employee that you spoke to. And some of them will go out there and say some things that didn't go well. Or some of them want to mask their performance and they go out there and they paint an extremely rosy picture. I got 100% on almost everything. So you also have to look for those kinds of behaviors within the department, because somebody who didn't do well will either go out there, be very angry and carry on as if they want to burn some tires right in the middle of the department, right? Or they'll paint a rosy picture that doesn't exist, you know? Or some of them will go out and they're so angry and they say, I don't want to talk about it. Your turn will come, and you know, those kind of comments, whatever. And the other person will say, oh, it was okay. It's a fine process. You know, it's okay. Everything is good. You know, you will be okay. That sort of stuff. So it's good sometimes to have a temperature check as to what is the mood and the morale of the department, especially when it's coming around that time of the year for the appraisals. So you do all that pre-work. And then, as I said, you're ready now to review the purpose of why you're sitting down here, and you have explained that. And you have gotten the self-appraisal, which it says conduct the self-appraisal, which is really, you're going to get that ahead of time. So I don't agree with the term use conduct, because it really is review of the self-appraisal. Okay. As a matter of fact, in future slides, I might just myself change it instead of conduct to review, because you're going to discuss the person's self-appraisal with them, let them explain to you how they did certain things, if things weren't right, what happened there. And then you are going to share your ratings. This is where the rubber hits the road, as we say. You are going to share your ratings with the person you're appraising, the appraisee, as we refer to them. And you are going to have to explain where there's a difference between what that person thought they did and your perceptions. And you will need to explain the rationale for your scores. This is where the scoring comes in. So you take the appraisal, you take your form, and you explain, you say to them, I'm giving you a 3 out of 5, you know, here for communication. And the person might have given themselves a 5 out of 5. And you will have to now explain why you gave a 3 out of 5 instead of the 5 out of 5 that the person gave. And this is where, again, your communication skills are important, because if you can't explain that and you can't explain the rationale behind your score, then you begin to have conflict. So for every item that is on the work plan, you will have to go through each item by item, and explain the score. Now, The person might have given themselves a 2 on the communication skills, and you have given the person a 3, which is bumping it up. And you will need to explain to that person why you gave them a 3 and encourage them to continue along that path and say, you mustn't underrate yourself, continue to work on those skills, continue to develop them because you have done pretty well with them, that. Everybody, no matter how poor the performance is, should come out of that appraisal with some sense of confidence and motivation. Because where the performance is poor, then you are going to have to discuss in the development area of your appraisal form what is going to be done and how can that person try to improve, or if it is somebody who is already a top performer, you need to indicate what else are we going to do so that you continue to grow and develop in this organization, especially if the person is a young employee. Okay, remember that is your role. We spoke about the role of coaching, and coaching falls right into the development. Now, if this is remedial, you'll have to tell the employee also, listen, we're going to set a plan for this to improve, and you have to always try and express confidence. You always have to try and express confidence in the employee. Okay, so you start out the interview and you usually start with the positives. When you start to share the ratings and stuff, you usually start with the positives. Okay, so if you have to jump around the form a little bit, you say to them, well, listen, I want to prioritize some things here and discuss these first, and then we'll discuss some other things. But if you start out with a negative area, you are going to have trouble getting back to a positive mood in the interview. So we usually tell you, start out with the positives. You need to, as far as communication is concerned, you need to adopt some skills. You need to be very direct and specific. Now, many managers and supervisors do not like face-to-face meetings. They don't like eye contact, and they don't like to bear bad news or news that is not excellent or tip-top, whatever. So discussion of performance sometimes becomes a problem for managers and supervisors, and they handle the appraisals very poorly. So if it's something that you don't like to do, you have to work on those skills because it's a vital part of your job and it's not going to go away. It doesn't matter which organization you work in. Okay. The other communication stuff that I'd like to tell you is that you should not get personal when you're doing an appraisal. There are certain words you don't use, like you don't say, I know you would always do so and so, or this is just what I expected of you. I didn't expect anything more. You always do so and so. You're the one that never does A, B, C, D, F, G. You are not to make the appraisal personal. It's to be based on factual performance. We had a project so and so. You had the objectives of the project. You have only achieved 30% of the project. Can you tell me what could have gone wrong? And ask the person to be a part of the solution. So how do you think that this can be rectified? Or how can this be avoided in the future? How can you avoid this in the rest of the project going forward? Tell me what you plan to do. Allow the employee to take some responsibility for their action. And that's another reason why the self-appraisal is done. So as you're going through the items and you're going through the self-appraisal, you have to have this mutual communication. Okay? And when you don't do that, you are going to end up with a lot of problems. You're going to have the stuff not signed. You're going to have people disagreeing, and sometimes it might even lead to physical confrontation. So you have to avoid that, okay? And you cannot do what we call skirt the issues, okay? If there is a performance issue, you have to be direct and specific about it. You cannot go around the bush, as we would say, and try to color it up and make it not look like it's a major problem. And, you know, well, it can be accepted and it can pass and it can, you have to be able to deal with the issues. You cannot skirt around them, okay? And you have to pay attention to your body language. Okay, sometimes employees come into their appraisals and right off of the bat before you even begin, they can tell what is going to happen in here because they see your face and they see your body language and they see your posture, you know, and come in, sit down there, you know, and they hear your tone of voice. It's all right, you can come in, sit down there. I'm going to be with you in 1 minute, sit down there. And they hear your tone of voice and that sort of stuff. And right off the bat, they know that something is wrong. Okay. And you cannot mislead employees also. We have to be careful how we nod to things. People have a tendency for everything you say to them, they do this. And when you nod, it signifies agreement and acceptance. So you're discussing somebody's performance that is not on par, and you are still nodding and stuff like that. And yeah, and you know, you're giving those body signals and stuff. And then you get to the end of the thing and the score is a low score. And this employee is saying, but this woman is not for real. What is going on here? I mean, she was agreeing with everything, and yes, and you go and tell another employee, and yes, and she nodded and you know whatever, and then when we get down to the bottom, she gave me a 2. So you have to be careful with what we call it. Yeah, it's true, absolute real life. So you have to be careful with what is called the non-verbals, and the same thing with the shaking of your head. You know, you shaking your head throughout the whole thing. This person doesn't even want to bother share anything with you because they're going to say, this lady done decide where I'm going fit. She done it already. She done decide. It's a low score I get in. So what is the use? So I just sit down there listening to her and looking at her. You know, what's the use? You know? Or you get so laid back in your chair that you're not, you know, it's like, what am I going to do with this person again? What am I going to do with Mary? I tired of this, you know. Let me just get this over and done with. So you have to watch your body language, or you scowl on your face, or you keep tapping a pencil on the desk, and you know, that sort of stuff. And of course, you're sitting behind the desk. Now, I know most times when I do appraisals, I don't sit behind my desk. If I don't have a table in my office space, I still come out from behind the desk and sit, you know, in my chair, either sideways or, you know, facing the employee or so. Because it's behind the desk is very threatening, you know. And people behind the desk seem to get a false sense of power sometimes. Anybody ever notice that? Behind the desk and I am God.
Yes, miss, that's true.
Right. Well, behind the desk, you're not God, and you cannot play with people's future, okay, and people's careers. So it's very, very important that you conduct that meeting properly, discuss whatever the remedial and developmental steps are, and document them. Now, sometimes, depending on the policy of the organization, we do up a developmental plan, which we may have a second meeting with the employee, and that is where sometimes we have what is called the follow-up meeting to discuss what are the remedial things or what are the straight developmental things. You know, somebody performing okay, but want them to learn more skills in Excel or learn Visio or one of those other tools or Access or something. So we will have a separate meeting to discuss the developmental plan, if it's going to be an extensive plan or remedial plan. Now, a good activity that you should do is at the end of a discussion, ask the employee to tell you what they understood, because you don't want anybody to leave with a misunderstanding. Okay, so ask somebody all along the way so you understand what we're doing, you know, just like how I might ask you here, do you understand what we're speaking about, or do you have any questions? Same thing should apply when you're doing an appraisal. You know, ask the person if they have any questions. Allow them to participate. Do you understand? Do you have any suggestions? Do you have any questions about what I'm planning for you here? Or do you understand why I felt you didn't complete this thing, you know, as expected, etc., etc. Very, very important to get that feedback. Ask the employee to summarize. Somebody has something in the background there that's causing us a lot of disruption. I don't know what it is, but careful. Rewards. I personally don't like to discuss rewards in an appraisal meeting. I never do. And I don't recommend it because it sometimes causes a whole lot of disruption. Okay? Meaning, I notice like in the public sector, the forms, and hopefully they'll change with all the things they're changing. The forms will ask if this person is to get an increment or what percentage of increase the person is to get, that sort of stuff. The discussion about rewards should be a separate discussion. Okay, the person mightn't even be earning a reward. So you can imagine if I'm sitting in front of you there and I haven't asked you to sign your form yet, and I'm going to tell you that based on this low score you got, you will not be getting an incentive. I'm not going to sign the form, am I? I'm going to find a reason why I'm going to fight that, even though I might have known that my performance is not good. And a lot of times people discuss rewards that they don't have. And that's what you have to be careful about also, making promises that the organization cannot fulfill. Because sometimes depending on how your rewards are constructed, it might be a part of profit sharing, or it might be profit sharing, and those figures are not ready till a particular time of year. Sometimes they don't come forward until sometime in the following year, especially if it's an end of year review. Okay, so I stay away from discussing rewards. If you're working with an incentive, you should have had a manual that is published in terms of what is considered to be poor performance versus satisfactory performance versus good performance versus excellent performance versus outstanding performance. Okay, in terms of scores. But usually the rewards is a session that management has to discuss and decide, okay, for this upcoming year, say we have a pool of $80 million that we will use for incentives, etc. And they'll probably go back and look at that band that is stated on the form and say, okay, if somebody falls in the good category, it means that they'll get 10% of what we have in the pool. Sometimes the pool is not necessarily tied to salary. It's a matter of how much money is in the pool. And when you have your compensation class with Mr. Sterling, you haven't had that yet, right? When you have that compensation class, these are the kinds of things that you can also raise and discuss with him in terms of the different approaches to looking at rewards, you know, as far as compensation is concerned. Yes, Anna, you have I see you lit up. You have a question? Anna?
Oh no, miss, you asked if we had gotten the class with the gentleman. I said no, but no, miss.
Oh, well, I didn't hear. Sorry. Okay. Because it looked like, were you muted? You might have been muted. Okay. So I like to leave the rewards discussion for another time. So the employee is going to ask you, so am I going to get an incentive? And you will have to indicate that, you know, there will be another meeting when that information becomes available. There will be a meeting, you know, for the employees, or, you know, with each employee or whatever. Because you have to make sure that you have your facts together as far as that is concerned. That is a dangerous area to wade into and, you know, have your facts together. Okay, you will create a lot of problems for yourself and for the department. Okay. Now we spoke about the follow-up meeting, and I've said that if you have a developmental plan or goals and objectives that you're also going to be setting for the next period, you know, or ones that are in place already. This might have been a mid-year. You have some that are in place already, but you want to reinforce them. Then you'll call another meeting with the employee to discuss those goals and objectives, as well as any developmental areas you have. Now you get to the end of the meeting and hopefully all went well and you have gotten to the end of the meeting. So now you want to have the person sign the form. And if the person is not going to sign the form, then you need to discuss what is the appeals process. Hopefully your organization has put the process in place. And if so, you should be totally familiar with it and be able to discuss it with the employee if the person refuses to sign the form. You go back and look at what is your company's policy, what have been the guidelines that have been given to you about that, and inform the employee how the person is to go about filing their appeal, you know, etc., etc. So you have to ensure that you understand how this process works. Otherwise, you, the manager, will be in problems. You sit down in there fighting this person to sign the form, and the person has no interest in signing the form. They don't agree with your score, and they don't agree with things that you may be telling them they didn't do well, or things that you're telling them they have to do as part of their development. It could be a range of things. Don't sit down in there and fight. Explain to them the appeals process and let them go through the appeals process. And then at the end of it, as we say, you do a final recap. So everybody understands, the employee understands where we go from here today, what's going to happen. I'm going to have a follow-up meeting with you. In that meeting, I'll discuss your goals and objectives, the ones that are left for the year or the new ones we're going to set. I'll discuss any developmental or remedial things we had, etc., etc. So make sure that the employee fully understands what's happening and what the process is, okay? So you need to have time, and that's why I'm saying I like to set 2 hours. Now let me caution you about something. Don't think you can go home at night and decide to put together 3 appraisals for the next day that are to be held. Don't do that. Anytime you do that, you are going to find yourself in problems because you will not have thought through that assessment properly. So I want to encourage you not to leave somebody's appraisal for a last minute event, or you bring it into the office in the morning because the appraisal is in the afternoon and you bring it in the morning and decide that's when you're going to sit down and go through the person's self-appraisal and look at your ratings and look at the work plan, and you're going to come up with the appraisal. Now, a lot of times persons will ask me a question about changing scores during an appraisal meeting. You can change a score, but you need to know, again, the rationale why you are changing that score, and the employee fully understands why you're changing the score. Now, the employee is not going to argue if the score is going up. You know, like I gave you the scenario of the communication skills, and the employee had given themselves, in a good case, a 5, and you decided that you are only going to give the person a 3. But after talking with the person, you might say, okay, I'll give them a 4. And you have to be careful with that, because if you have too many scores that have to be bumped upwards because of an objection from the employee, there is a level of trust now that becomes questionable. The employee automatically is going to feel that this was not fair, and they go away and they talk, and I had to get her to move up the scores. So take the time and do it properly. There is some room. You should come up with your score before you go into that appraisal. Okay, there is a little wiggle room in there, but careful how you use that wiggle room, because you will never recover from that mistrust. Never, never recover from that mistrust. I've seen appraisals done where they were so poorly done that the department head took them and took the work plans and whatever and changed the scores. Now that really shouldn't be done, but the appraisal was so poorly done and it went to the appeals process and it had to be done over. because there really was no basis for what the manager put down there for most of the things. And that will happen when you do not provide proper supervision and leadership, or you write objectives that you cannot truly measure. So when you take on the role of manager or supervisor, you have to perform proper leadership. You have to ensure that you know what you're doing. And a lot of your woes will come when you don't leave enough time to carry out processes like this one. Any questions? Anybody want to share anything? Hello?
Yes, hi, Miss. How are you?
I'm fine. Who is this?
Miss, this is the one and only Philip Earl. You're looking quite dapper as usual.
Well, Philip, I'm not seeing you on my screen. Please,
My
sorry.
apologies. I'll fix that in a minute.
No, not from you. It's not from you. Remember, when I'm slide sharing, I can only see 3 persons at a time on the sidebar. So
Okay.
I will go back and see if I can see you, Philip.
All right, not to
Okay,
worry.
I'll go back and see if I can see you. But no, you don't have your picture up, Philip. You only have your big name.
Yeah, I'll fix that as well. On occasion, Miss, you
Okay,
find
Philip.
persons who would express what I've coined appraisal apathy, where, you know, if they get a 3, okay, it's a 3. If it's a 4, they're not really interested in the entire process. And, you know, if they get a 4, it's good. If they get a 3, it's good. I've not seen any material that actually speaks to apathy as it relates to appraisal, you know, to get their buy-in.
Say that again, Philip. I'm missing something. Philip?
Yes, are you hearing me clearly, Miss? I was just checking to see if
Yes, but there was a break there, and I missed something in what you said.
Okay, I was expressing that on occasion I've come across persons in organizations who express what you call appraisal apathy. As you know, it doesn't matter to them what score they get, or if they get a 3, fine. If they get a 4, okay, well,
Right.
good or so. You know, I haven't come across any material on how to address a situation like that.
Well, the apathy usually is as a result of certain things. One, the person might have had a bad experience in the past with the appraiser. They might not have had a good relationship with the supervisor. Maybe the relationship between that employee and the supervisor is an antagonizing one, or the supervisor has not been a good communicator. Wow, sorry, please let me just hang up this. I didn't realize it's on. Hi, in a class, can I call you later? Okay, I'll call you, but it won't be till about 9:30. Let me put that on slow sound. Sorry, that's an overseas call, so I just wanted to just say I will call back. Thanks, sorry. Yes, as I was saying, Philip, a lot of things could be responsible for that. A lot of things. And when you see that the supervisors, it is the supervisor or the manager's duty to ensure that they communicate with that employee during the appraisal. Somebody who sits there and has nothing to say, the supervisor should encourage that person to talk. Maybe the person is afraid, or they've heard what another employee came out and said. You know, the grapevine is rampant, but it is the supervisor's job to try to get that person to communicate. A lot is lost if you have an employee that sits in front of you and does not communicate during the appraisal. So it is the supervisor or the manager's job to try and get that person to communicate. That's why your communication skills are so important.
Agreed.
Okay.
Or they could have had thought they were appraised unfairly previously. So going forward, anything is anything.
Well, that's what I said earlier on. I said it depends on what the experience had been before. Yes,
Yes.
there could have been several contributory factors. And it is for you, the supervisor, to try and find out why that person isn't communicating and encourage them to communicate. We find sometimes, for instance, with new employees, that they're hesitant to communicate. You know, they haven't gotten a good feel of the environment yet. You know, they're kind of hesitant to communicate. So we find that a lot of times in the new ones, and then some of the older ones who are just looking forward to the next 2 years, I'm going to retire, so this don't matter to me one way or another. You know, this is the same old thing, same every year, the same old thing. And they'll sit there and behave like that. So even with those, you have to try and communicate, because you might say to the person, you've been here a very long time, but you are still a valuable member of this organization. So you don't seem so pleased today. What are you not pleased about? Or why don't you want to add anything? You don't want to share anything? I mean, you know, over the years, you have been a good contributor, etc., etc. So you have to size up the what is happening in front of you. Okay?
Agreed,
Yeah.
Miss.
Any other questions?
Yes, Miss. Based on your discussion, you're saying that the employee should do his or her self-appraisal. The rater takes it 2 weeks before, uses that, and does his or her own appraisal of the employee. Then the meeting essentially is really to discuss what was decided on. So in that case, then there's an argument that you should not try to adjust the scores. Then I'm asking, it's so much as if the meeting then is almost pointless, because the manager has already decided on a score and is just trying to justify the score in that meeting. Could a process that is, I think, a little more effective be done where they go through each item, and at that point, what the employee, so okay, time absent from work, and the employee say 3, and the manager said, no, I think it's a 2. And then the discussion is there, and then the score is decided at that point.
I thought that's what I said.
Oh, well, that's not the impression I get, so I'm glad you're clarifying.
I thought that's what I said. No. I thought when I dealt with this item here, sharing ratings and explaining the rationale, I thought I explained that you go through each of the objectives on the form.
Yes, you did, but
wait, just a
okay.
minute.
Yes.
And I even said that sometimes, even though you might have a bad one, like at the top, it's better not to start with a negative. So pick something on the form, an objective of the form that's positive, and
good.
Start with that. And then you go through each item. I thought I explained that you go through each item. The meeting, just a minute, you're not allowing me to respond. Let me respond, and then you still come back and tell me, whether I didn't explain it properly, and I'm all open to explain it again. I thought what I explained was that you go through, when we spoke about sharing ratings and explaining rationale, that you're going to take the work plan, or I didn't include the individual performance plan, which is the same thing as the work plan, but in private sector, it is called most times individual performance plan. But in public sector, it is called the work plan. I thought I explained that you take each objective and you go through it. And there might have been a difference in the score between what the person had on the self-appraisal and what you have on the self-appraisal. What I cautioned about is having situations where you have all the scores, for instance, have to change. Some of them you have to bump up. The employee, and I think I said this, the employee will never argue with you if you are having to bump up a score. But if you are having to disagree, if you disagreed with a score that the employee have, and I gave the example of the communication skill, the employee had given themselves a 5, and you have decided it's a 3. There's going to be an argument. And yes, you might decide to bump it to a 4, but you still have to be careful how much of that is gone on, because the whole meeting is a factual meeting. But sometimes you find that the the employee will overrate themselves in some of the things and cannot explain. And that is why it is important for you to explain the rationale behind the scores. So what I'm hearing you say is that the way this has been presented to you is as if all these scores are decided before time and you just come in and give them, and that's the meeting. No, there is to be, and I keep saying to you that it's a mutual communication time. It's a time for discussion between both of you when you're up in this area, especially of sharing ratings and explaining the rationale. So I'm not sure, maybe I don't understand what you're
it seems I misunderstood, because I really did get the impression that the employee came with his or her score, the manager came with a score, and then it was, so it seems I really, that was what I had initially gotten, but you have clarified it.
But remember, I said, that the self-appraisal is to be submitted to the manager 2 weeks before. So the manager has, or the supervisor has an opportunity to sit down and examine what the employee has done, examine what the manager's perception is, and try to see where there could have been a difference or whatever, so that it can be explained when they sit down to do the appraisal, because the buy-in by the employee is very, very important. So it's not a done deal. But what I caution you about is a manager who did not do their homework, did not observe the employee's performance, and a lot of the stuff that they have there is not factual. And the person who has the self-appraisal can be very factual about it. And then all of a sudden you begin to have some disagreements, because what the manager is saying happened and what the employee is saying happened is two different things. And the manager cannot explain the rationale for the score that has been given, or why he or she did not perceive the employee's performance in the way the employee perceived his or her performance. And that's why this is a meeting that has to be handled properly, and the communication skills have to be in place. So I hope I've kind of cleared that up.
Yes, you did.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions? Because this is a very, very important activity. As I said before, some of you joined the class. If you are a manager or a supervisor and you cannot conduct proper appraisals, that's a big gap in your job, and you will have a lot of conflict within your departments, a lot of conflict among the employees. And if you're in a unionized environment, the union will take it up. And all of a sudden there's all these kind of hearings. Not only that, if somebody is separated based on performance issues and they go down to the labor board is going to ask for the last appraisal, and they will review it, and they will decide whether it was a fair appraisal based on whatever. They might ask for the work plan and the appraisal, etc. Any other documents. They may even ask for prior appraisals as well. And this is why, from an HR standpoint, it's also very, very important to ensure that the documentation is proper and that it is in a proper place, good records management, etc. Because when these cases come up, they'll go back and ask for quite a bit of documentation. Okay. So.
Sorry, Miss, before you move on.
Yeah.
So this is Damien. I just want to clarify something.
Sure, Damien.
With respect to discussing rewards, so you said that you don't personally do it, and you recommend that it not be done.
And I told you why.
Right. I just want to clarify, because you said before, in terms of the presentation and recognizing when there are lists of things presented to us. If we get a question and we're asked to provide the sequence in conducting appraisals, based on your indication that you don't recommend discussing rewards and you don't personally do it, do we include that when you're listing the sequence, or do we leave it out?
I won't penalize anybody for leaving it out. What I would want to see is if you leave it in, you have a clarification to it in that an employee has the right to know what is the process, okay? And they're going to ask you what is the process. So in explaining discuss rewards, you can indicate that you will indicate what is the organization's policy on rewards as they have to do with performance incentives, etc. And you will say to the employee, you know, the outcome of your appraisal as far as rewards are concerned will be discussed in a follow-up meeting. But what I'm saying to you is there's going to be some discussion about rewards because everybody is going to ask you, especially as I say in the public sector where the big form says, has a block on it there for you to check whether incentive to be paid and this sort of stuff. And somebody is going to ask you in the meeting, am I going to get my incentive? And you will have to come up with a proper policy statement that indicates that, you know, this is a matter that will be discussed in another meeting, you know, after the reviews have been completed, something like that. So it's not a step that you're going to have to leave out as such. But what I'm saying to you is that careful, do not make promises in that step. So if you want to write it as discuss the rewards process, you know, or something like that, it's okay.
Okay, thank you, Miss.
Okay. Anybody else before I move on?
Miss, I wanted to add from, you had asked a question about why we conduct self-appraisal. This is Michelle.
Okay, Michelle.
I believe that self-appraisal is key. I even heard where Anna was saying that at her company, they don't conduct self-appraisal. It's very important because you as the employee, you also have a say in your appraisal process. And it helps with transparency. So I go ahead and I appraise myself, and then my manager or rater go ahead and appraise me after. In the appraisal process, I know most companies, or I'll say in the private sector, they allow for you to provide evidence to support why you appraised yourself that, or why you gave yourself 4 out of 5. So it helps you, it helps to provide evidence to justify your appraisal. Because I know when I'm doing my appraisal, I upload my evidence or I attach my evidence. And remember, your goals are SMART, so they're measurable. So once it is you have evidence to validate that in the self-appraisal process, it helps with transparency and it reduces confusion, or it helps your rater to more understand and have the evidence there, and they know that you know exactly what you're doing, and as it regards to appraising yourself, right? So it also provides evidence and support and makes the process much easier for yourself and for the rater, and it even helps with the conversation or the discussion that you will have. I also want to add to where you spoke about the performance meeting. As you had mentioned, it's key to set the ambience of that meeting. So you, as you mentioned, you start off by saying, how are you? Sometimes you can even in discussion before delving deeper to find out, you know, how was your last performance period and what you thought was good. What is it that, you know, just set the pace and allow the person to be themselves so that the conversation can flow smoothly. I also agree with you as it regards to rewards. Sometimes it's not good to tie rewards with the performance process. We are now going through that at Digicel because we had actually put a hold on rewards or bonus. And because employees had it so attached, it was a big problem in all our meetings that we had with employees. Even persons are saying at this point, I don't care if I get a exceed, achieve, or fully achieve, because rewards was tied to performance. So it's not so good.
Yep. So you have to know, thank you for that sharing. You have to know, what your company's policy is on some of these things. Now, your mention of the attachment of the evidence, in the public sector, in the forms that I saw, they also encourage the employees to on their self-appraisal form indicate what was the evidence. So in other words, what was the actual achievement of what was being discussed. So again, there is some flexibility within the organizations in terms of how you structure your performance management system. And you're going to find that in the more mature environments like a Digicel, a Grace Kennedy, Scotiabank, some of those, the system will be very robust, as we say. It will be very comprehensive, okay? Because one, they have the resources to be able to set up the system like that, and they will monitor it and ensure that it has all the pieces. I find that as I go down into the smaller companies, a lot of the things that we have spoken about are not in the process, not just for the appraisal meeting itself, but in general. So you're going to find that the more experienced organizations, the more, as I call them, mature organizations, the multinationals, etc., those systems are going to be very, very comprehensive. So like the digital system is a very comprehensive one. NCB has quite a comprehensive system. And what is good about some of the mature systems is that there are instructional manuals. So people don't have to sort of waffle around wondering what is required here. And employees are also made aware of what is required of them. And this is why it is so important for the organizations to have a proper communication plan so the employees also understand how the system works. What can I expect from the system? How is it supposed to work? I mean, why is my manager doing certain things, etc. But when those pieces are not there, we see a lot of confusion, we see a lot of union activity, etc., because there are gaps in the system. Because a lot of the companies we have talked about from top to bottom, how to begin to design a system. You're looking at why we do it, how we do it, when we do it, what type of organization we're doing it for, what is the organization's involvement, all of that sort of stuff. So you'll find that a lot of the medium size and the smaller companies do not have comprehensive systems. Some of them, the form, when you look at the form is just a set of boxes that you check, okay? And plenty of the steps that we have talked about are not in place, especially the communication steps, not in place. So there's a lot of conflict and people feel that, they're not being fairly treated. So hopefully a lot of you will be able to improve your skills, even from just this discussion this evening. Because if you're a supervisor or manager, you can set for yourself how you conduct your appraisal meetings so that you get the most out of it and it becomes a win-win situation between you and the employee and the organization. So as we move to look at this last slide, I want to caution you also about how you handle defensiveness during the appraisal. Okay, I have seen some very physical things take place, because especially if it's an end of year appraisal, and here locally again, end of year appraisal is tied to money in most cases, and people get defensive before they even come into the appraisal because they've gone to courts and they look at the fridge and the new sofa and the this and the that, or they plan a vacation, they're going to the North Coast for a weekend at Sandals or wherever, or they're going to buy a new car, or a new refrigerator, new this, new that, new whatever, and they've spent that money before they technically have earned it. Because we are trying to come out of a situation where everybody got an end of year bonus, and that is changing. So it's a very defensive time now, because a lot of companies are not giving these across the board bonus anymore. It is based on performance. So gone are the days when you could come to work late every day, leave at 3 o'clock every day, don't do your work and face it with the manager and do whatever you do. And at the end of the year, you're still getting your 10% bonus money. Those days are gone. And so we're having a lot of trouble. And this is why there must be a re-emphasis on managing people's performance properly, because it is now going towards an incentive-based, okay, performance system. I hear the police talking about it. I've heard several companies who are not doing it now talking about performance-based pay, okay? And a lot of them are talking about not waiting until the end of the year to give this performance-based pay, but to be giving it at periods during the year. So like at mid-year and end of year. And in some cases where they're like service oriented, like sales organizations or service organizations, they might be even doing it quarterly, where the incentives are being paid quarterly. Okay, now in the BPO, it's a whole different system. You know, incentives are paid based on the various contracts that you work on, and they're paid at particular periods that the organization sets up. Okay, so you need to, as a manager, be prepared to handle defensiveness from an employee. Somebody who is going to sit before you in the appraisal and become defensive. Okay, somebody who comes with a lot of excuses as to why the work wasn't done and felt that, you know, you need to understand why the work wasn't done. Now, COVID is a whole big thing. We're going to get a whole lot of reasons why particular jobs have not been completed, work has not been done because of COVID, and some of it legitimate, some of it not legitimate. I just had a situation yesterday with one of the clients where an employee, and this is in the BPO. Who is here from the BPO? Is it Philip? Who's here from a BPO? Answer me, please.
Yes, miss.
Right. I just had a complaint made to me yesterday about an employee who would answer the phone and put the customer on hold. And when she was chastised about it, she said, well, no big deal, I'm still getting paid. And another employee said to her, but that is unfair, that is cheating. She said, but it's free money. Okay? So we have problems. We have problems with the work from home situation.
Miss, you can repeat that? What did you say the person said?
The person said it was free money. If you don't work in the BPO, you probably won't understand it. She answered the phone and put the person on hold. So while the call is on hold, it is still counting towards her, correct me if I'm wrong, Philip, towards her handle time, meaning the time she spent on the phone with the customer, etc., etc. Okay? Right. And she gets paid, and like her incentives will factor into some of that handle time and stuff like that, and how many calls she took for the day and stuff. So she's answering a lot of calls, but she put in the customers on holds so that is not being transferred into a sale. Okay, so work from home has a lot of problems because we are not disciplined enough to handle a lot of the work from home situations. Now, as I told you before in another class, some of the companies do have some technology that can see what's happening from work from home, and they also have some reporting requirements, you know, to ensure that work is being done. But some of the companies have not invested in that kind of technology. So I know, for instance, the public sector has not invested in that technology. So when the Prime Minister made the announcement the other day that all the public sector workers are going to work from home, I know that that is chaos. I know that that is sheer chaos, okay? And I'm sure we're going to see some of those results. But my point here is that you have to be able to communicate with these employees when they become defensive to save yourself as well, okay? So the first thing you want to do is to recognize that defensive behavior is normal. All of you here get defensive. Some of you get defensive with me. Okay, and you might say I get defensive with you. I don't really get defensive with you because my aim is to understand what you're saying and to make sure that you understand, because my job is to ensure that you get some learning out of all of this. Okay, but everybody that comes and sits in front of you during an appraisal is going to be defensive. It's a very emotional time, and emotional for many reasons. Some people do not handle feedback well, okay? Some people, because they haven't had that relationship with their manager, are very cautious about what this person is now going to say, especially if you were one of those managers or supervisors who never communicated or gave feedback through the year. But all of a sudden now this person is going to be in for a big surprise. And this is why we tell you that performance appraisal should never be a surprise. You should not really have trouble. You're going to have the outlier, the odd one who is going to not agree with you. But you really shouldn't have problems with your appraisals, because if you have been communicating with that employee throughout the year, it's not supposed to be a surprise. This is not a surprise package. You know, open the ribbon, take off the ribbon and see what jump out at you. No, that's not supposed to be the case. Not a nicely wrapped surprise package, okay? So you have to recognize though, that because of the nature of the discussion, anybody sitting in front of you by human nature is going to have some degree of defensiveness, and it's normal behavior, okay? Do not attack that person because they're defensive, meaning the type of language you're using towards them. What are you afraid of? I mean, what you coming in here afraid of? Why? There's no need to be afraid, you know, sit down and calm your nerves. There's nothing to be afraid of and that sort of stuff. You know, you're always defensive. Somebody gives you a response for something and you say, that's a defensive response. You're always defensive. You have to watch your communication. You have to always empathize with somebody, okay? Meaning you start with certain phrases, and some of this requires some further reading for some of you, okay? And it makes for good reading if you do a little bit of research on your own as well in developing your own skills, because there's some phrases, for instance, that go along with showing empathy. You know, like you might say to somebody, I can imagine now, okay, PEP has just been postponed for the third time. Okay, I have a granddaughter, young granddaughter, who is taking PEP. And I said to her mother yesterday, even though her mother is a psychiatrist, I said to her, boy, you're going to have to watch her, because this is enough to turn the child crazy. You know, you prepare for the end of March and all of a sudden, you know, here's me. I prepared for February, then you heard it was March. And a lot of these children are putting in extra work, and the mothers and fathers telling them, you can't do this until after PEP. You can't do this until after PEP. After PEP, we do this. After PEP, this. After PEP, that. Right? So a lot of the parents are going to come to you. A lot of the parents are on edge. So you might have one of those parents who comes and sits in front of you and trying to explain why their work is not up to par. And you don't begin to understand. Yes, it might be poor performance, but you always have to be in a position to show empathy. And you would start off with certain statements like, I can understand the difficulties that you're going through, but let us see what we're going to do about this, or how we can work with this, etc. And it allows the person to calm down a bit. Yeah, who was asking me something?
No, Miss, I was agreeing with you. I was agreeing with you what you're saying about the whole it's the displacement of the anxiety from the employee coming from home and so on.
Yes,
Being empathetic
yes.
would help. I was agreeing.
Yes, okay, thanks. And you have to be open-minded too. So you have to be able to do what we call look at the big picture, look at the broad picture. Let me see if I can understand what is happening here. Now, sometime back, I think I told you that you need to know your employees. Remember, you had a list of things that speak about the advantages of performance management. You remember that list in the early stages of the course?
Yes, miss.
And among the things is that it told you that you have an opportunity to know your employees, you have an opportunity to know good from bad performance, that sort of stuff. So you also have to be open-minded, you know. Maybe the job wasn't done 100%, but maybe it was done to 80%, and you now have to say, okay, let me look at this environment. So then you begin to look at a cause, you know, what cause and effect. So you have to be able to prod now and maybe ask some questions as to, okay, do you understand the computer program you're using at home? Do you understand what was asked of this project, even though you should have been meeting with the person? But you have to be open-minded and look at the total picture. Just in the same way that your nonverbal and verbal cues are important, look at the employees' verbal and nonverbal cues. Sometimes you can save yourself if you can pick up what that mood is. Okay? Somebody who starts to breathe heavily and, you know, is shaking their head all the time you are talking to them, you have to look at what is going on there with the emotions. And you have to be careful. I'm not scaring anybody, but I have seen some confrontations. I've had to, from an HR standpoint, deal with some confrontations that occur between a manager and an employee during a performance appraisal. Because as I said to you, people are coming in there with a certain limit of defensive behavior. Depending on the time of year the appraisal is, the end of year especially, they have a lot of preconceived things that they have planned and want to do, and this, that, and the other. Okay? So it's important for you. You can also tell, now Philip asked about the employee who doesn't participate, and that would be something that you'd observe as a nonverbal, okay, in terms of what is happening with this person, you know. You stop periodically. You don't just rattle off every item, you know. It's supposed to be a mutual communication process, as I explained before. So you go through each item, you're seeking some feedback from the employee. So you have to watch for those non-verbal and verbal behaviors, okay? And in the verbal, you watch for some of the phrases that somebody will tell you. They'll wash up their hand and tell you, it's okay, that's all right, you can continue, it's okay. And you kind of look for some of those behaviors. You can tell that you may have some problems at the end of this appraisal. Again, with somebody agreeing that they agree with your scores or whatever, it's okay, you can proceed. It's all right, you can proceed. No, I understand, you can proceed. And that is what you keep getting going through the whole thing, you know, that there's problems. You should never threaten anybody. Meaning, if this performance does not improve next year, you will not be in my department. Or if this performance does not improve, I'm going to recommend to HR that you be terminated. That is not the way it is done. You cannot threaten anybody. I expect you to do this. You are required to do this. So you have to minimize your threats and encourage somebody to participate in the process. Always start with the basis that everybody deserves an opportunity to improve. Okay? So encourage the person, you know, to improve whatever it is, or to continue to give of their best, or to continue to grow, etc., etc. There is a process in place for you to deal with the poor performance. If at the end of the time the scores are low, then yes, you must give some idea of what the consequences are. Okay, but you don't threaten the person. You'll have to say to them, you realize these scores are low and you'll have to try to improve them. But I have every confidence in you that you want to improve it and you will improve it. So let's work towards improving it. Now, if they come back again the next time and the score is low, then you have to go a little further and say to them, you realize that based on the organization's policy that you will not be able to keep your position if this performance does not improve. And you don't go any further than that, okay? But you can't threaten somebody. Now we tell you, recognize your own limitations. And by that we mean, you may have somebody sitting in front of you that has some underlying problems. We have a lot of bipolar persons in organizations and we don't recognize that they're bipolar. Okay? We have persons who, for instance, are constantly absent from work and we don't know why they're constantly absent. And some of them might be because of mental health issues or other issues that are causing them to not perform. You are neither a psychiatrist, nor a doctor, nor God, nor a judge. And when you find that you have some of these things and you're not sure what you're dealing with, we tell you, recognize your own limitation. Go to HR and ask HR to take a look at this person, etc. HR is supposed to be equipped to know whether this person needs some external help or not. And in most of the larger organizations or the well-established organizations, there are linkages between outside providers, health providers, whether it be somebody could be having a drug problem. Okay, you notice somebody sitting in front of you and kind of falling asleep and whatever, you make those observations and you go to HR and seek HR's help. They will have to decide whether to, refer this person out to the proper agency, etc., etc. You don't try to deal with it. Okay, you don't try to give medical advice and psychiatric advice and that sort of thing. You are not equipped to do that. Okay, yes, you are going to coach, but you must know, as I told you in coaching, what is the limit of your coaching. Okay, so be careful, and don't make promises or take up a problem and believe that you can solve it. You need to seek HR's help with stuff like that. Okay. If somebody breaks down during the meeting, and sometimes that happens, I tell the famous story that I tell all the time about an employee that I had who was a very, very good employee, excellent employee, but there was one aspect of his work that just could not improve. He had communication skills problems. And his job required him to go out and make presentations. And sometimes I don't even like to talk about him because, he has passed on. But it's a good example of what happens when an employee sees themselves as being perfect. And when they come into the appraisal, if all the scores cannot be perfect, they don't accept them and sometimes they break down. So this guy had very, very good performance. I could never ask for better performance, and I could never ask for somebody whose contextual behaviors were excellent, meaning if we ever had a problem, he was the person you could call upon. If we had a problem with an employee who was sick and needed to get home, you could call him and he would drop whatever he was doing and get that person home. Or we have a Labor Day project, he's there. Whatever it is, he's always the first one at work and he will execute his tasks. But the one area of his job that he could not execute properly was the area where it had to do with his verbal communication skills. And his job required him to make presentations at time. And I had to take that away from him because his pronunciation, his grammar was very bad. Very, very bad. He'll complete his projects and stuff, and he will write good grammar. But when he would stand up to speak, I mean, the H's were never there. Whatever was singular turned to plural, etc. So over the years, I offered to provide him with assistance. And I found somebody who could provide him with one-on-one because, I don't want to embarrass him and people get embarrassed with things like that. And I found a one-on-one person for him to go to. He had objections to the person because it was a male. I found a female for him to go to. He had objections to it. And I would sit and plead with him. I would leave a whole afternoon to do his appraisal because I got accustomed to what would happen in the appraisals because that part of it was just not improving, and it was a substantial part of his job. And when I could not give him like high 90s as an overall score, he would break down. He would break down in the end. He would come very emotional and stuff like that. So my point is, this last item, postpone the action and reschedule the appraisal meeting, I would have to postpone the meeting. So I came to know that no matter what I did, I would have to have a second meeting with him. So I would not try to get him to sign any form in that meeting or whatever. I said to him, okay, let's calm down here. Give him a box of tissue and said, okay, let us discuss it again. And I would wait a week or two and then reschedule the meeting, and I would have a better outcome. But to the day when I left there and he left because we disbanded the organization, I could never get him to change that action. I could never get him to improve that activity. So his appraisals were always problematic. He got to the point where he would sign them, but his comments would be lengthy. Sometimes he would attach a whole page to it in terms of why he felt it was not fair that he didn't get a perfect score, because he saw himself as a perfectionist. So in dealing with what you're dealing with, you're going to see people like that who feel that they're perfectionists as well. And you will have trouble with them in the meeting, but you'll have to understand how to handle any form of defensive behavior. Very, very important, because if not, you can find yourself in a lot of problems. Okay? Any questions? Hello?
No, miss.
Okay. Okay, because we end up this section. So, pardon me? Yes?
You're very clear, miss.
Okay, because we're coming to the end of this section, so I want to deal with it. Now, there are a couple other items that I want to draw your attention to, which you will probably see, I think, in your book. I think this should be in your book. But you need to understand, as part of this defensive behavior, what are the categories some of these performers can fall into. Okay, I can't remember if this is in your book, you know. Solid performers, performers who have a misdirected effort, and performers who are what we call underutilizers. Is that in your book? Let me see if it's in your book. I can't remember if that is in your book, you know. Can't remember. But whether or not it's in your book, I want to call your attention to it, because it helps you to understand how to deal with some of the performance things that you see. It mightn't be in your book, but I have put it for you. Well, it's not on your slides either, so you might want to make a note of this. I can't find it in your text. Did anybody see it in your text, where you speak about solid performance and misdirected efforts? Let me just take a look again, because some of these things, because I feel they're important to you, I actually include them in the course. Let me take a minute here and see if that was there. Because none of you are answering me, so that means that you're not reading, or you would be able to tell me. Huh? Or you would be able to tell me. Nobody is telling me whether I have those things in here. Okay. Let me
I'm not seeing it, miss.
All right.
Good evening, miss.
Good evening.
This is an email. Just a question for you. In speaking about handling defensive employee, we have a situation where I am where an appraisal was done for a particular officer. He was marked down. My boss doesn't necessarily want to keep him on. a year ago, he had a stroke. And since we have noticed, as they're saying, we're not judging because we're not experts, but we have observed his reaction where he is forgetful. You'll give him a letter to type. And most of his work most of his tasking, I basically end up doing it. He'll send it to me because he doesn't understand. My boss is aware. He wrote to HR about some 6 months ago to say, I'm not going to be renewing this person's contract because he has debilitating sickness, meaning, he's not well. HR has not done anything. When the appraisal was done, he reacted he sent out correspondence to the top heads, including the CDS, Chief of Defense Staff, and the Cadet Committee. So now they're in a boil. And last week they had a meeting. I'm not sure HR knows what to do because today they're still paying him and my boss has not signed this contract for him to stay on. So whereas HR erred in that regard, what can be the recourse for?
Well, the thing about it though is, yes, the contract has come to an end. But because he was ill in the middle of the contract and he came back and you all had him come back to work without a proper medical recertification.
Exactly.
There are some problems there, even though the contract has come to an end. And in the regular government way, depending on what happened there, there would have been what they call a medical board review. But when they put them on contract, I don't think the medical board review applies.
Comes into play, yes.
No,
yes,
applies
yes,
to that.
Unfortunately.
But he can have a situation where if he can prove that his contract was not renewed because of these perceived medical issues and there's no proper documentation, then he may have a case.
He's fighting it and there were no proper documentation because unfortunately HR didn't write him and my boss is just now doing the paperwork. So I think and contrary to the fact that we may think he's not all there, he still has some collective thing and he knows what he's doing because he says to me he's not going down like that.
So how long after this stroke? What, he had a stroke?
He was driving to do a testing and apparently he passed out in his motor vehicle. It is said when they called me, he was practically out for about 6 hours. He was, yes, so he had lost, there was a memory loss for about a month because he had to do therapy. He didn't recognize his wife or anybody when he was in the hospital. I was actually overseas at the time. He didn't recognize anybody.
So how long after that he was allowed to?
He was out for 6 months and then my boss, as you're saying, being sorry for him, took him back on. Yeah. Persons were telling him not to do it, but he was saying.
But he couldn't do it like that neither. He couldn't just do it like that neither.
I think the whole process.
They would have to have a proper medical review.
So
as to whether he could come back and perform his work and whatever, and then they would decide to have to pay him out for the rest of his contract based on his inability from a medical standpoint to carry out the rest of his duties.
Well, I am just theorizing that I think HR realized that there's some blunder in the initial stage when my boss asked for him to come back and they didn't put anything in place. Hence why they cannot let him go, although my boss wants him to go. So it's just a big mess at the office.
Yep. They're going to have to come up with some
a good strategy.
Package, and he might not accept it.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, his contract has ended, but the actions that should have been taken in the middle of the contract
taken in advance.
In terms of his ability to perform the rest of the contract was not taken in advance.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Miss. I just wanted to hear your perspective on this.
So something is going to happen there, and whether you'll be able to negotiate with him is another matter.
Thank you.
When he came back, how much time was left on the contract?
When he came back, he actually had 1 month. And my boss allowed him to stay on because he was saying he's not working and he was hoping. The wife basically asked us, said he wanted to come back to work and they were hoping in being back at the office, it would help him to come around. For a minute, he came around, but our work is stressful. It is training where we're always on the demand.
What age person is this person?
He is about 53.
So he's not even near retirement age. this one is going to be a problem. They're going to have to negotiate this one with him. And I'm not sure there's going to be a good outcome, except for where if the organization can prove that there is a severe medical situation, he might not even agree to undergo a medical review.
He says he's okay, but I mean, he's in my office and on observation, as I said. I mean, he gets stuff to do. We have stuff standing off the King's House. It takes a month. He'll send it to me based on the timeline. I'll just do it and send it back to him. My boss is aware of all of this. So that is on the basis that he's saying that, you know, we have a timeline, and based on our work, you know, he really can't manage the pressure. So it is, I'm kind of sorry for him, because I think if they really let him go, it's going to push him back and worsen his condition. He doesn't want to leave.
Yeah, but unless they have another position for him in which he can act, but if not, but it requires a medical intervention, it requires a medical review.
Which is why I don't understand why HR from last year, when my boss mentioned it, they did not have or send him off to do some assessment. You know,
that should have been done. That should have been done before he returned to work. That should have been a requirement. So you have a situation there, and it's probably going to end up with a legal intervention.
All right, thank you, Miss. I appreciate it.
Okay, okay. All right, I want you to just make a note of some things I'm going to tell you here, okay? As I said, it's additional information. I don't think I have the time to type this up and send it to you, but it's really just some additional information in terms of, you know, your own development and understanding when you go to appraise performance, some of the things that you should recognize when you look at, you know, cause and effect, because we will have different persons who become what we call marginal performers, and some of these are the ones that get in here and really argue with you, okay? And you need to recognize the type of employees that you have. So we first look at the ones that we call solid performers, okay? And those are the persons who have high ability, they're very motivated, and it's easy for you to find developmental opportunities for them, meaning how you will further development, because those are like your solid performers. So this is where what I'm telling you is where your staff kind of falls in. And then you have some that are called, what we would say, have misdirected effort, okay? They have a lot of motivation, but they don't have the ability to go with the motivation. And when you have those, you need to focus on trying to see if you can train them. So you're going to have some that you give them something to do, but their efforts are not what you expect, but they're so enthusiastic about doing it. They're highly motivated and will try their best and stuff, but they end up becoming a marginal performer, because what they have given you in terms of quality of work is not what is expected. So those are the ones that we call the ones that have misdirected effort. And then we have what we call the underutilizers. And those are the ones now that have high ability, okay? They have high ability, but they're not motivated. Life is just routine for them in the department, okay? And what you have to look at with those is, one, their communication skills, their interpersonal skills, okay? A lot of times we find those will produce good work, but they do not communicate well within the department. They're not team players, etc. So you are not even using them to the best of their abilities, because sometimes you're not even aware of what they can do. But they're usually people with high ability, but will just do the minimal amount of work. Okay, not interested in going any further.
Which one is this, Miss?
Underutilizer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And then we have one we call the deadwood. Okay? And that one is somebody with very low ability and motivation.
Miss, did you say Deadwood?
Deadwood, yes.
WOOD.
Yes. And the class usually give me a hard time with this one, but that's okay. And these are persons with low ability and motivation. You can't do anything with these. If somebody's motivation and their ability is low, there's very little you're going to be able to do with them. Okay? So you usually have to take some action, which is sometimes putting them on probation. Sometimes, well, government allows you to demote, but the private sector labor law does not allow you to demote them. And sometimes you have to just separate them. But what is most important in all of this when you start to deal with you know, the categories of the employees you have as far as what is their performance level, you have to also be careful and ensure that you understand what your organization's disciplinary policies are, okay? So you don't want to go afoul, especially in this one where you have a lot of employees who are low ability and low motivation, and you want to process them out of the organization. Ensure that you are doing proper documentation so that you can follow your organization's disciplinary code, okay? Questions? Rashina, you asking something? I see you all lit up.
Miss, I don't know why I'm lit up. No, Miss.
Okay, all right, Rashina. Okay. Any questions, comments? No?
Miss, is there a way to motivate the underutilized also?
Yes,
Especially when you're doing the performance.
yes. That's what I'm saying. You have to look at them and see what it is, you know, because this person has high ability. I mean, this might be the person that, for instance, you ask a question in a team meeting and he's the first person that answers. Okay? But doesn't volunteer to do anything, but will always have a perfect answer and a good answer, and you want a calculation as the first person to rattle off a calculation. But just does just enough work, you understand? Doesn't volunteer to take on anything, might rattle off that calculation, but not volunteering to come and help you do the spreadsheet, you know? So you have to look at those people and you have to challenge them. You have to challenge them. You set additional work for them, and maybe the department has become very routine. You know, you have people who come in and are very highly motivated, you know, and become poor performers because the work in the department is not challenging, their particular desk is not challenging, etc. So a lot of times you'll have to look at these people, look at what is happening, and see even how you can give them more challenging work or encourage them to speak up. It might be the opposite way. They don't speak at all in a meeting, have all the skills in the world, but just sit back.
Miss, these are the suggestions we can use to raise the wood from the dead, right, Miss?
So what?
Everything that you're seeing in terms of the motivation, in terms of allowing them to express themselves in meeting, these are the ways in which we can raise the wood from the dead wood person.
Raise it. The deadwood person is different, you know.
Okay, so you're talking about
what Chantal just asked me about is the person who is underutilized. Was that correct, Chantal?
Yes, Master.
Right, the person who is underutilized. But the person who is a deadwood is somebody that no matter what you do, that person is just going along, and eventually you have to outplace that person. You know, every year the performance appraisal has come back in just marginal, you know, not showing any interest in what he or she is doing, no interest in growing, etc. That's the dead wood. And a lot of times we're seeing a lot of those in the organizations where the manager, even though the performance appraisal is low every year, has allowed that person to just continue to stay in the job, not pulling any weight, we have persons who have been promoted that should not be promoted because they don't have the abilities, the skills and the knowledge and the competencies for a particular position. But again, based on the rate of errors and based on what the manager want the person out of the department, that person was promoted to another department. And that poor performance continues along with that person. That is the deadwood. And no matter what you do, that person might have had, the organization has allowed that person to have 5 years of poor performances when you look at the appraisals, and still carrying that person in the organization. Sometimes you hear them say, well, they only have 2 years to go to retirement, so let him just stay, you know? But then how do you account when you look for somebody who is a continuous poor performer? It's something that must be dealt with. And that is the dead wood. And no matter what you do, as you say, you're not going to raise the dead. You're not going to raise the dead in this case, because over the years, this has been a culture of this person. And the organization has allowed this person to stay and perform like that. So when you don't take the actions when you're supposed to take them, then you end up carrying this person along in the department. So you have to recognize how many you have like that and what you're going to do about them. Did I answer your question?
Yes, Miss, you did. I understand the solid performer, the misdirected effort, underutilized, and the deadwood.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Any other questions? Because I'm coming out of this area now. We're coming
Yes.
out.
I would like for you to just repeat once more in terms of the misdirected performance. I know you said something about being substandard.
The misdirected performer is somebody, the misdirected effort is somebody who lacks ability. Okay, the difference between that person and the deadwood has low ability. Okay, but the misdirected effort person lacks ability altogether. Okay, but is somebody who is the nicest person, the sweetest person, highly motivated, will run and do whatever you want, will volunteer to do everything, is very motivated, you know, happy, cheerful. But you say, Lord, I wish I could help Mary. She is always volunteering to do this, that, and the other, but she just doesn't have the ability to do the job. You have her in an accounting job and she's willing and she's trying hard and she prepare all of the reports and whatever. But when you look at the reports, the amount of errors that are there, and you have been working with her for some time, but she just doesn't have the ability to grasp the formulas and to put things together. And again, this is another case where basically no training was given to this person. Okay, she's high on motivation, but is she misplaced where she is? Have you tried to train her to see if that ability can change? If not, eventually you also have to take some effort, some action. But the misdirected effort is she sees things in a different way. Where she's putting her effort is not where the department's effort should be. You understand? The things that she thinks are important in her performance are maybe the things that are not the priority areas of her performance. But she doesn't tackle the other things because she really doesn't have the ability. So we see this a lot sometimes when you, again, have had persons who lack certain technical skills, for instance, but yet you are placing them in a position that requires those skills. So over the years, that becomes a real problem. Nice, sweet, always at work, couldn't want better from her, but she just doesn't have the ability to learn the concepts of the job. Is that clear? Chantal?
Yes, Miss. Yes, Miss, it is.
Okay.
Miss, one question from me. On the misdirected again, Miss, that is the marginal performer is under the misdirected effort. It's the same thing, right, Miss?
all of these are marginal performers, you know, even the person who is a
Okay.
solid performer. Okay, because the solid performer will only do so much. And therefore, the manager has to realize that if you have a good performer and you don't continue to develop that person, they become a marginal performer, meaning they just do just so much. The quality of the work they do is high, but they are not doing more than just this handful of whatever. It will be well done, but they're not taking on any challenging work or whatever. So you, the manager, to prevent that person from becoming just the average performer, right? Or just the good performer, you have to look at development of that person. You have to recognize that this person has high ability, and therefore I need to look at what I can do to make that job more challenging. You might recommend that they go and learn another skill, maybe outside of the office or whatever. But solid performers who do not become challenged eventually become marginal performers because there is no challenge to the job. So all of these persons I gave you fall under a heading of marginal performers. So even though you have a good, high ability, motivated person, they will become a marginal performer if you do not develop them. Any questions? More questions?
Miss, so for the solid performers.
For the what?
The solid performers.
Yeah.
Because first I thought they were always performing at their best.
They're going to perform at their best, but they're going to just do so much and no more. Understand? Because maybe the job becomes very routine to them. So you find that that person, you know, like for instance, this person might only take 2 days to do something that another performer would have taken 4 days or 5 days to do. Understand? And we'll spend the rest of the time playing games on them computer and doing all this kind of stuff. And basically is not growing. Yes, the objectives that are given, and that is why we also have to look at how we're setting objectives, because the manager might be to blame because the type of objectives that have been set for this person are also not challenging. Okay, so the same rating comes in, good rating, but this person is not being rated outstanding or whatever because he's just doing what he has to do to clear his desk and whatever, and it is cleared perfectly and good and stuff, but not growing, not taking on any responsibilities. You look at the person and you say, you're not even sure the person can be promoted because I just do my work and do it and leave and go home. So you have to watch what is happening with your solid performers. If not, they end up being what we call marginal, meaning they end up becoming like average. The work is being done and stuff, but there is no growth. Can't become a team leader, doesn't become a team leader because maybe I recognize that this person doesn't have good leadership skills and I didn't do anything about developing that. Maybe the person has good technical skills, but has weak leadership skills, you know, and I, the manager, have done nothing about developing this person so that this person could be, you know, continue to be a solid contributor to the organization. So I'm marginal because I'm not growing. Any other questions? Is that clear? You understand what I've just told you?
Yes, miss.
Okay. Okay, so let us move on. Let us move on. We are going to take a look at some legal issues. This is a very short module because we're going to start into another module after this before we leave here tonight. We have been talking about legal issues and we talked about some legal issues in staffing. Some of these same legal issues are going to come over into performance management, okay? I've just picked out some stuff for you because as I told you, even in the staffing book, a lot of this stuff in there is sort of based on the American way of life, okay? And I'm sort of trying to put some of this into a local context for you. I'm not going to deal with a lot of the rewards part, legal issues and rewards, because when you get into Mr. Sterling's class, you haven't had Mr. Sterling yet, right? Am I correct?
No, miss.
No, miss.
You're
Right.
correct.
No, you're correct.
Right, Mr. Sterling deals with compensation, and he should be covering for you all the different type of pay plans that exist. So what I want to bring you back to in this context is some of what we actually spoke about in staffing, but in the context of performance management. So you remember what I told you employment at will is, right? You remember what I told you in the other class what employment at will is?
Yes, miss.
What is it? Who is answering me?
Karen.
Yes, Karen, what is it? Tell me.
That when you hire a person, you just hire them at will. So you hire them at will and you fire them at will.
Meaning what, Karen? Tell me, meaning what?
It's meaning that they can't bring you to court, they can't take any legal actions or so
forth. Okay. But what you have to remember about employment at will is that it is stated in the terms of the contract that you receive. Now remember, every letter of employment that you receive is a contract. So you know that letter when they make you a job offer and they tell you to report to work at a certain date, and you know how much you're going to be paid and what your hours of work are, the job description, all of that, okay? Those are contractual obligations. So there might be a sentence in that employment letter that says that you are required to give the organization 2 weeks notice, or in most organizations now it's like a month notice. You know, if you decide to leave the organization, you're supposed to give the organization a month's notice, or the organization will also give you a month's notice if they're going to terminate your services, you know. But the law requires that after you complete the probationary period, that you can't be just separated without cause, okay? So during the probation period, which is anywhere from 3 to 6 months under the Jamaican labor law, I can dismiss you without giving you any reason for your dismissal. You also can leave the organization without giving us any reason for your leaving the organization. That is during the probationary period. And probation can be anywhere from 3 to 6 months. You'll find sometimes that employers are extending the 3-month probation to 6 months, even though some of that is done because the manager never sat down to do what he or she needed to do in terms of even giving the employee objectives to work on. And when it come time now to write up the appraisal as to whether this person can be confirmed as a permanent employee, they're at a loss as to what to put on there. So the easiest thing to do is to extend the probation for 6 months. That is now one of the negligent behaviors, okay, that we see managers and supervisors doing. However, be aware in the public sector, that whole process is different. And I've told you that before. And sometimes I can't even remember what it is because you get hired and then you have to go through appointment, you go through probation, then you go through appointment, then you go through confirmation. And some people never ever get confirmed. Those of you that are in the public sector, remind me that process because sometimes I forget what it is. But it's permanent. Totally different. Pardon me?
Permanent. I think that's the term that they use, getting permanent.
That is the appointment.
Is the appointment.
Right. So appointment is where, that's what I'm saying, the appointment is where you are made permanent. Now in the private sector, permanency comes at the end of the probationary period. right? Whether it be 3 months or 6 months. But I'm saying that I'm seeing a lot of the 3 months extended because the law allows you under the labor law in the private sector to extend that 3 months to 6 months. However, during that probationary period, the employee earns no benefits. Okay, meaning no health insurance, no can't join the pension plan. Sometimes allowances are affected, that sort of thing. But in the public sector, I've seen where some of the employees never get appointed. And that's one of the things that's going to happen. So some of them are coming out of there in retirement age without any benefits because they were never appointed. Okay, so they're still there as if they're temporary employees in a way.
Miss, sorry, I've heard of a situation now where a teacher, she is a senior teacher, but there is no documentation to prove that she's a senior teacher. So she should be going on retirement possibly this year. And what she told the school is that she's a senior teacher. So the school is looking up for that documentation. There's no documentation to say that she's a senior teacher. It seems as if the principal that was there before just confirm it verbally, but there's no contract. So no, the current principal has to be back and forth between the school and the Ministry of Education to see that legal agreement to say where she's a senior teacher that she can, when she retires, she will have a better package than just a regular teacher.
Well,
but
is she being paid? Is she being paid as a senior teacher now?
No, miss. Miss, sorry, I'm uncertain if she's being paid as a senior teacher because the principal that is now in the position, he came in the post based on what he was told before that she's a senior teacher. I am uncertain if she's being paid as a senior teacher, but what he was saying to me is that they are trying to, given that there's no documentation on the school or from MOE, they are trying to put something together now to see if they could assist her, given that she has been working for such a long time and now she should go off on retirement.
Well, if she's being paid at the rate, then there's a better chance. But if she's not being paid at the rate, that is a far stone to throw. Can only hope that they will be able to do something for her. But there's a lot of them like that in the public sector. A lot of them. Somebody else was asking something. Two of you had come on at the same time. Who was the other person?
It was me, Miss Tiffany. You were asking about the whole confirmation process.
Yeah.
So after a person is appointed in a post, you are given a 6-month probationary period. So during that 6-month period, you're required to do a medical examination. Upon the medical examination being satisfactory, and then a probationary report is done to see, based on how the person would have performed during the probationary period. It also takes into account the times of absence and lateness. Once all of that is satisfactory within the 6-month period, then the recommendation is made for the person to be confirmed.
Okay, so you see, it's a long process in the public sector, but what happens is that a lot of them never get to the confirmation period. The last one you said is what, the confirmation?
That's the confirmation, but as it relates to the persons sometimes not being appointed and then reach the pensionable age, based on the fact that there are a set amount of positions in government entities, you find out that they employ persons outside of the establishment. So when these persons are outside of the establishment, there is no set position to permanently appoint them in. But what some organizations do is when it comes closer to the time, we will find positions to put them in so that they can be appointed and then they can benefit from a pension. But it all depends on if a position comes up.
So you understand why there's so much problems now with them trying to right-size the public sector?
Yes.
Okay. And what is sad for some of these employees is that they will be leaving the public sector without any pension. And the pension is small to begin with because up until recently, the pension was a non-contributory pension, meaning the employee never contributed to the pension. It's a fully paid government pension, which means that the pension is small. Okay? So there's problems there. There's a lot of problems in the public sector, and anybody who didn't really plan their life, you know, outside of there and have a little something and buy a little piece of land and put it down so you could resell it or whatever is coming out of there. And this is why you see the stories in the papers all the days that this pensioner is suffering so bad and this one is suffering so bad because, you know, a lot of them didn't understand also what it meant if they never got appointed. So it's kind of sad sometimes, very sad.
Miss, when you say pension, are you referring to like a contributor pension or the NIS pension?
No, the contributor pension, but up until just a couple of years ago, employees in the government, in the public sector did not make any contributions to their pension, unlike the private sector. The pension was a fully paid, it was a non-contributory pension, fully paid pension by the government. It's only in a couple of years now that they have managed to change it to a contributory pension, as exists in the private sector, where, you know, you're allowed to put in up to 10% of your pay each pay period. It's the normal is usually 5 or 6%. In some cases, the organization will have their pension plan where, you know, they're saying, okay, you put in 6% and we will put in 4%. Or you have some that said, okay, we will put in 5%, but under the law, the employee can put up to 10%. Okay. So, but when you get over to excuse me, to Mr. Sterling, you can discuss, that is something to discuss over there too. I don't want to get into that side of it, so I have sort of taken that part out of your course so that you can discuss the different forms of compensation when you get over into the compensation course. Okay. So the employment at will is where there's a clause during the probation where you can be dismissed without cause and you can leave the organization without cause. But after the probationary period, there is a stated clause in terms of how much notice you give the organization and how much notice the organization will give you. And we won't even get into how you do separations because you have Dr. Taylor and you should discuss that with him fully in terms of how is a separation conducted, because the labor board requires a lot of steps in carrying out the separation. Everybody deserves what is called a hearing. So this is why I'm telling you, and I keep insisting that your documentation must be good. Your performance documentation must be good, because when these separations are taking place, the performance information is an integral part of the hearing as well. Whether the person is appealing their performance appraisal or they had low appraisals and you're dismissing them, all of that documentation becomes a part of the hearing, and the hearing has to be put together in a particular manner. So I want you, when you go over to Dr. Taylor's class, to ask him under the labor laws, how is a hearing to be conducted? Because we find that when the hearings are not properly conducted, the labor board is ruling that people have to be reinstated to their job because what is called natural justice was not in place. So I don't want to take up, you know, time in this class to speak about those labor law things, but it's important for you to know the impact of the whole performance management and the link between performance management and the labor law. Okay, and what impact it has when you don't do proper documentation or handle your performance challenges properly. What are the implications for the labor law and for the organization? Okay, so the other thing we look at is negligence. People will bring, now these things we are discussing are things that can happen in terms of legal liabilities to the organization as a result of not following proper procedures, especially in the whole matter of managing performance. So we speak about negligence, and when we speak about negligence, this occurs in cases where procedures are not followed, or the system is not properly implemented, the performance system not properly implemented, or the employee's evaluation is unfair, okay? So therefore, an employee can challenge a system based on negligence, okay? And it's negligence on the part of the organization. So what the employee is saying, the organization did not see that the system was properly implemented. They had all these policies and procedures and manual, but nobody saw that it was carried out properly. My supervisor never gave me any feedback. My performance evaluation was unfair. Whatever the procedures are that were written or the policies were not followed. So we sue the organization for negligence, okay? The other one we look at is defamation, okay? And you have to be very careful with this. There's a practice out here that should not exist, in that a company will call up another company where an employee worked and ask for information about the past employee. You're not supposed to do that. You should be getting a written request from the company that is seeking information, and that request is also to be signed by the prior employee, giving permission, giving the organization that it is coming to consent to divulge the information that is being asked to the new employer. Up to today, and it's so funny that these things are happening, because I structured today for an organization a consent form that's to be signed by employees who are asking that information be given to a new employer, okay? And I put in all the boxes that need to be checked to say this is the information we can furnish, because it shouldn't be just a carte blanche form. It shouldn't be just a form that say, I give my prior employer permission to furnish all my personal information to my new employer. Shouldn't be like that. And one of the things that I have left out on that consent form, and I've told the company that it should not be given like that, is medical records. So when you go to another company and you're filling out an application over there, and it asks me, I contact your prior employer, you make sure you pay proper attention to it, okay? And ask them if they have a reference check form that they are going to send, and is there a block on there for you to sign giving consent? Because what will happen now is some of the companies are not paying attention to it. So they get the call and they send every Jesus thing over to another employer. And all of a sudden, the person didn't get the job, and they come back now and they want to sue the company for defamation, sue the company where they worked for defamation, because unfavorable information was relayed. Now, people are asking, can we have the last performance appraisal? So if you don't want that to go, you will have to make a decision in terms of whether this new job, what it is worth to you. And if you refuse to say that your last performance appraisal can be sent to your new employer, well, if you don't get the job, don't come back to sue the company. Okay, so I've told my clients that unless they get a properly signed consent form, not one bit of HR information should leave that company for anybody who has worked there. The only thing that you could verify without a consent form is that the person has worked here. Yes, you can say John Brown worked here from January 2020 to December 2020 and nothing more. Otherwise, you can be sued for defamation. So you have to, for those of you in HR, you make sure that you're dealing with these background and reference checks properly, and that you're not just sending off employees' information to other organizations unless there is permission, consent by the prior employee. Okay.
So Miss, sorry.
Yeah.
I just say, for example, you're taking on an individual and you have to do a security vetting. You have to also seek their permission to do that vetting?
Yes. You're supposed to. So how are you going to get the information? How are you going to get the information? You want to know if the
Sorry.
person, you want to know if the person has a police report.
Yes.
Okay. So you have to ask the person if they have a police report. And suppose the person said, yes, they had one done 2 months ago. You have to ask them whether you can access it. Or are they going to bring it to you?
What we would normally do is write to NIB. So we would invite the persons in, let them know that they were successful and it is a requirement that a security vetting be conducted. They would
But
come
you're
in
supposed to get consent.
so
You're
it has
supposed
to
to
be
get
a
the
written
consent.
consent.
Yes, it should be. Otherwise, you didn't give the person that job, and all of a sudden something happens and the person feels that you did it based on improper information, or the agency gave unfavorable information that they did not consent to.
Okay.
So it's best that that consent be done. Okay, it's best that that consent be done. So defamation is a real thing. Okay, and they will sometimes out here we feel that the courts don't attend to things like this, but more and more of this is coming before the courts. We have a whole set of new young lawyers that are what I call brash, and all they'll do is they'll go and look for a precedent, a case that has been handled somewhere else in the Commonwealth of a similar nature, or England or whatever, and they use that as a precedent to bring the charge in the court. So a lot of the things that we felt are not possible are possible right here in the court. Okay. And then we have misrepresentation, and that goes back into what I just said, where you're disclosing untrue information, or you provide a glowing reference for an employee with poor performance. And you have to be careful, because when the company that the person goes to and got this glowing reference from you, and John is a superior worker and can perform whatever, and John go over there and mess up the IT system and whatever, and the company decide now to take some action, they can come back to you and said, hold on a minute here, and they will take legal action. They want to see what was the performance, the actual performance of this employee. Because what happened, companies will do that because they want to get rid of somebody. A manager will give somebody a glowing recommendation because they want to get rid of them, but it can backfire. And many companies now have a policy where managers are not allowed to give recommendations to prior employees. So again, you need to understand what are the policies your company has in place. And some companies also in general have a policy where they do not give recommendations to past employees. They'll verify dates of employment, but they will not give recommendations, because there's thin lines now with a lot of these legal things. Okay. And then we have what is called adverse impact. Now, we don't have a lot of adverse impact here, not in the way that other countries have it. You are seeing what is happening in the US with this whole matter of racism. You now have the newest one in Britain, where if you saw that Meghan and Harry interview the other night, you realize that it has opened a whole can of worms for Britain as far as racism is concerned. So adverse impact is where somebody feels that there was discrimination during the hiring process, okay? Especially if I am of one of what we call the protected classes. Now, we don't have protected classes here in Jamaica, but like in the US, you have protected classes. Like women are in a protected class, American Indians are in a protected class. Some of the Asian countries, some of the Asian populations are in protected classes. And if in the States they feel, those classes of persons feel that they were not treated fairly during the hiring process, or you chose a man over me because I'm a Black woman and you chose a white man over me, there are laws in that country that allow them to go and sue for adverse impact. Okay? And if you don't have proper information in place to show that this discrimination did not take place and that you had based on skill, they will win a lot of money against you. But we don't have that out here. But it's important for you to understand it because some of you might go to work in another country, etc. And it will help you to understand some of what is going on now when you're reading all this world news, especially what's going on in the US with racism and immigration and stuff. Adverse impact is something you always have to fight against when you live in the US as a minority, as the Blacks and other nationalities, ethnic nationalities are called minorities. Okay, the Hispanics are considered, as Spanish-speaking people, considered minorities. Black people are considered to be minorities. Jamaicans are considered to be Black people. Hope you know that. Okay, so when you go up there and you're going to fill out the census form and put other, there is no such other race. Okay, you have to check the box that says Black. West Indian people are Black. So no matter how you think you're a browning out here, you can go up there and go check the block that say other. It's Black you have to check. Okay.
What if you don't want to put, what if you don't want to check the box African American because you're a Jamaican and you select other?
Then you're in problems because you don't fit there. You fit in the blocks that say Black. And you have to complete the form.
African American, and you're saying I'm not an American, I'm not an African, I'm a Jamaican.
Right, but there is no such race as a Jamaican. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. There is no such race as a Jamaican. Jamaican people are considered to be Black people because you're not white. So all those that you see fear and fear and fear out here, they have a Black grandmother somewhere. There was that pretending and have the blue eyes and the light color hair and pretending and whatever. There is somebody down the line that's there. Unless they can trace their full white relatives, they cannot go up there and put in Caucasian or whatever. Okay? Or whatever the block is. I know for a fact because I lived in America for 30 years. I know. And when I first went there, I was one of the most naive ones. I did go put on West Indian. And the lady take up the thing and come back to me and say, what nationality is this? We don't have no such nationality. Are you Hispanic? No, the Hispanics have a box. And if I was lying, I could have said I'm Hispanic because I look like a Hispanic. Because when I go up and travel, go to Florida, them come chatting a whole lot of Spanish to me and I have to say to them, I don't speak Spanish, I speak English, right? So it's a problem, but when they're doing the census up there, you don't have no block to check, say Jamaican or other. You can check the other block, but I'm sure going to come back to you with it. You can check the other block and put Jamaican, they're going to say to you there's no Jamaican race. You can put West Indian.
This once you're Black, is it that it's always African American for the Black race box? Just asking.
No, they have Black. They don't have Afro-American. There's no such.
African American. They used to hear of that one.
The people who have gone there to live and have had children there, they're trying to soften the word. You understand? And they coined this phrase Afro-American. But when you're doing the census block, there's no African-American box on there. Okay, and if you even go to HR, when HR has to fill out the US government census block, there is no block unless they modify that in the last 3 years. There's no box that says Afro-American. And you couldn't claim that you're Afro-American because you're not Afro-American. You're not a citizen either. Unless you became a citizen, and if there's a box and you became a citizen, then I guess you can check, or if you were born there to Black parents, I guess you can check Afro-American. It's a big questionable area. Big questionable area in the countries that are doing census. Okay, I have never seen one of the British forms, but I would imagine that the British form would just say Black. Okay, so Anyway, adverse action is a real thing in other countries. We don't have that sort of situation here. The closest we would come to it is when we discriminate on hiring persons from particular communities. Okay. I haven't heard of any case brought in the court out here, but I'm saying to you, anything is possible because we have a set of young lawyers that are them believe in human rights and advocacy. And I wouldn't be surprised if one day we see a case in the court where there was discrimination in hiring based on a community that the person came from, and somebody else with lesser skills was hired in the position. So I wouldn't be surprised if in years to come we see this being brought adverse impact here locally based on a different set of regulations. Okay. And then we have the illegal discrimination, okay, which again, that again is what is going on up there. That is outright discrimination, not hiring somebody because of their race, their nationality, their color, their national origin, okay? And anytime you're going to be in another country and you're going to hire and people feel that these issues are in the way of them being hired or they're being paid less when you hire them, they will bring these cases against the employer. Okay. Okay. As we go to the towards the end of this, I just want to remind you about some of the things that make up a good performance system from a legal standpoint. Okay. And these are things that we discussed very early up in the course. We discussed the performance dimensions and the standards. And we say that they must be clearly defined and they're job related relevant and within the control of the employee. We spoke a lot about that in terms of not writing objectives that are not achievable, etc. We spoke about the fact that procedures need to be standardized, and should be the same for all employees within a job group. So as the company looks at how it's carrying out its performance system, it needs to look at the categories of the employees and see, can we group everybody, for instance, into the non-management category, or can we put everybody into the management and supervisory category, or do we have to separate some of those? The procedures have to be a bit different. So sometimes maybe we have 3 forms because we now have 3 categories. Okay. We also spoke about the need to give employees timely information based on their work performance and give them the opportunity to correct them. Now, where this comes in is that you terminate somebody and they go down to the labor board and you have terminated them based on poor performance. And the person is going to get a lawyer because they're going to feel that they were never told that their performance was poor, nor was there any effort made to help them develop and stuff. These are cases that could be brought again. Therefore, when you're designing the systems, again, the whole matter of communication, coaching, and feedback, I think companies should have very specific policies about what is the company's position and requirement on those items. Okay. Employees who feel that they were never allowed to speak about their performance, they were not given a voice in the review process, and they were treated badly during the performance appraisal. They were not treated with courtesy and civility. Okay. Now, you know that we have some managers and supervisors who will shout and bark at people and feel that because they're sitting behind the desk, they're God, and therefore they can bark and they can shout at everybody. Okay. And those days are gone. Employees will bring a lawsuit against the company. You dismiss me, you force me into a confrontation, and I reacted, and then you dismiss me. And again, as I said, they will go and file some legal representation, and they will try to get compensation. Now, some of these things are happening, but they don't reach the courts. they're being settled out of court. We have sexual harassment cases, things like that, that are being settled between the former employer and the former employee, and it's not getting into the court. Okay. So you have to be careful of that. And every good system should include an appeals process. And we talked a lot about that already tonight, again, about, having an appeals process. Okay. The way we gather the information, and these are all going back to the chapters that we talked about. You have a chapter that we did on gathering performance information. And this is again reminding you that when you don't gather factual information and gather proper information, you can find yourself in legal problems. All of these are really labor board issues, in terms of natural justice and fairness, okay? And if the rater is biased, remember we talked a lot about that in terms of rater errors, etc. Whether you train people, and remember we talked about training as well. We talked about, you remember the forms of training? What are some of the forms of training that we talked about for raters? Anybody remembers?
Frame of reference training is one.
Yes, that's one. Anybody remember any of the others? These are important concepts of your course, All of these things here are going back to things that we discussed, and they're important concepts of your course. You also have the coursework that you're doing and the case studies, and these things are coming into those case studies. A lot of these things that we're talking about. So, you need to really pay attention to them. So I'm not going to tell you what the others are, but the first one that Chantel told us, yes.
Behavioral observation, Miss?
Yes.
Self-leadership?
Yes.
And RET?
Right, which is what?
Rater error training.
Right. So again, when somebody is going to write up a bad performance rating for somebody and dismiss the person, and the person go down to the lawyer, they're going to find out, ask, can you show us any proof that these persons were trained to carry out these duties? Okay. Did they understand how to manage their performance, or were they abusive or controlling or unfair or whatever? Okay. And I've spoken a lot about the importance, number 8, the importance of proper documentation, how important it is to have proper documentation, including specific examples of performance. Okay, so we just talked about that and talked about like the evidence-based information, like you're doing appraisals, okay, you have a standard, but what is going to tell you that that work was carried out to that standard? So documentation is very, very important. And then lastly, does your system include procedures to avoid discrimination or bias or abuses? And that is usually policy. Does your company have a policy that says that, all employees will be treated fairly, performance will be evaluated for all employees using the prescribed steps, that sort of stuff. And we go back again to training, like in the BASIS training, rater error training, that sort of stuff. Did you make information available to managers in terms of how to avoid bias and that sort of stuff? So these are just some little guidelines that say to you, if you want to know if you have revised your system or you're setting up your system, and you want to know if you have tried to close as many gaps so that you have not left your system open to litigation, these are some of the things that you would look at to ensure that your system is legally sound, as we say. Any questions? No questions? Okay, so we have come to the end of this. Now we have one more class left, and we have one more module to cover. The module that we have to cover speaks to team building. I don't necessarily want you to have information overload tonight, but you're going to have to make a deal with me then. What do you think is the deal I'm going to ask? What is the deal you think I'm going to ask?
You're going to let us go and then we read on our own.
And we read.
Can be an option, but that is not the deal I'm looking for, but that can be an option.
Come to class on time. You're going to start class on time.
No, I'm going to start class on time, but that's not the option I'm looking for.
An extended class next week?
Yes. You would have to have an extended class next week because the module that we're going to deal with, and you will need to read, by the way. The module that we're going to deal with is managing team performance. And I want to be able to answer any questions, overall questions that you may have, because that will be our last module before you start presentations. So I will give you the 15 minutes tonight if you will give them back next week so that we can cover this quickly. And if you read, we'll be able to cover it quickly. So yes, the option on reading, please, if you would read this team performance thing, because the team performance thing goes back a little bit into some of the early things that we covered. So if you'd read that and be able to ask questions and we move along quickly, then I will say to you, yes, you can go for tonight, 20 minutes early. So if you give me an agreement for that, I will say you can go now, unless you have any questions about your coursework, of course. But as far as going into a new script, I'll wait until next week, but we'll go about 15 minutes over next week. And I will start on time, like I did this evening. Many of you missed the first part of the class this evening.
Miss, I was unavoidable late. I did ask.
Yes, I got an apology for
Thank you.
Yeah. But I will start on time. Why I started on time is because I had a power cut just as I came on. We had a power cut this evening, and I wasn't sure how well the system was going to hold up because it kept telling me, giving me a lot of messages about the internet. I had a power cut just as we started. So do I have an agreement on that? I don't hear.
Yes, Miss.
Response. I only hear one person respond. There's 36 of you on here.
Yes, Miss. Yes, Miss.
Yes, Miss.
That's great.
Yes, Miss.
All right. You have any questions about the coursework? Any quick questions? Moving along, doing your case studies and your case reports. Hello?
Yes, Miss, we are making.
All right. All right, well, and if you have no more questions about what we did tonight, then...
Excuse me, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Rashima.
Go ahead.
For the presentation that starts on the 24th, is it that all members in the group must present, or once we can show that work was done, they don't have to be a presenter?
Well, the way the cases are, let me get the cases. The way the cases are, I'm sure there's work in there for each person. I'm sure there's work in there for each person. The only thing that's not going to be presented is the case report that you're going to send to me. Okay? But I would say that there is space in there for each person to present portions of that case and answer the questions, because in some cases each of the case has multiple questions. So I need to see the involvement of the team, because one of your areas of rating has to do with team performance, right?
Okay, Miss, thanks for the clarity.
I'm just looking at I'm looking at the rubric, quality of presentation. And so that would include, like whether the team was involved, etc. So go back and look at your rubric here. Very, very important you understand your rubric in terms of these particular coursework. This is not like your staffing coursework. So please go back and read your rubric, and remember your coursework for this course is 40% of your grade. So I expect you to put in some quality work because it's 40% of your grade. Okay, I have a lot of marking to do with this course because I have to mark your presentation of the case, your delivery of the case, and I have to mark your case report as well. Okay, so go back and look at it, and if you have any questions, make sure you ask me, send me a message or ask me next week as well. Okay, any other questions? Hello?
No, miss.
Why you guys won't answer when I ask a question? Oh, there's a delay. Okay.
Yes, between unmuting the mic and
okay. All right. Well, you all be safe.
You too, miss.
Okay, and I'll see you on Monday. Please double mask. I'm just warning all of you. Please get in the habit of wearing double mask now. If you're wearing a cloth mask, put one of those little paper-looking masks underneath it. Okay, and make sure your mask is fitting you tightly around this part of your face here, around your cheek and over your nose. I'm begging you. I'm begging you. See the numbers today, 800 and something. And many of you will not get a vaccination for maybe another year because you're in the young age group. So please, I'm begging you. Don't want to hear that anybody, we had 2 persons in my last class, the practicum, who came down with COVID. So please, I don't want to hear anybody is sick, and I don't want to hear that any of your relatives get sick. So take care of them too, please.
Thank you for the concern, miss.
Yes, miss.
All right. All right.
Bye.
See you Monday night.
Good night.
Good night, miss.
Night.
Have a good night.
Night. Miss Thomas? I might have to call her. Miss Thomas? Okay, let me call her. Halloween, we're done.
Okay, I'm here.
Right, and I know it's early, that's why I said let me call you. So, I told them they have to give me back the 15 minutes next week. Okay, sorry about that, okay?
No, man, I'm sitting right here at the desk.
All right.